5 years ago, the man I thought loved me abandoned me at the hospital with our newborn son. I had nothing. No money, no job, no family. Just a baby, a broken heart, and hospital bills I couldn't pay. His wealthy mother had ordered him to leave us, and like the mama's boy he was, he obeyed without looking back. But what happened next will shock you. Because when he accidentally ran into me 5 years later, he couldn't believe his eyes. The poor, struggling waitress he'd thrown away had become something he never expected. Before I continue with this incredible story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It really helps to continue sharing these real-life stories with you all. Now, let me tell you exactly how this all began, and how I got my ultimate revenge. My name is Lucy, and I'm going to tell you about the biggest betrayal of my life, and how it led to my greatest triumph. I grew up in foster care, bouncing from home to home until I aged out at 18. By 23, I was working as a waitress at Danny's Diner downtown, living in a tiny studio apartment and surviving on ramen noodles and tips. That's where I met Oscar. He was handsome, charming, and different from the usual customers. He'd come in every Tuesday and Thursday, always ordering the same turkey club sandwich. We'd chat while I refilled his coffee, and slowly, those conversations became the highlight of my week. "You know we have other sandwiches, right?" I teased one day. He laughed. "Maybe you could help me explore the menu sometime? Over dinner somewhere that's not here?" I should have noticed how he said not here, like he was embarrassed by the diner, by my world. But I was lonely and hopeful, and when someone like Oscar showed interest in someone like me, you don't ask questions. Our first date was magical. He took me to a nice Italian restaurant, listened to my dreams of maybe going back to school someday, and made me feel like I mattered. When he asked what I did for work, I proudly told him about the diner. When I asked about his job, he was vague. Business development for a company downtown. Pretty boring stuff. We started dating seriously after that. Oscar's apartment was beautiful. Leather furniture, expensive art, a view of the city. Way nicer than anything I'd ever seen, but not so fancy that it screamed wealth. "This is amazing," I said the first time I visited. "It's nothing special," he replied, but I noticed how he watched my reaction. After 6 months, he asked me to move in. I was over the moon. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere, with someone who truly cared about me. But there were red flags I ignored. His clothes were expensive, his watch was a Rolex, and whenever his phone rang, he'd step away to answer it. Most concerning was how he dodged my questions about meeting his family. "Soon," he'd always say. "My mother is very traditional. I want to prepare her for how serious we are." 8 months into our relationship, I discovered I was pregnant. I was terrified. We'd been careful, but accidents happen. I spent my entire shift at the diner that day, working up the courage to tell him. When I finally broke the news, Oscar went through every emotion possible in seconds. Shock, fear, something that might have been joy, then fear again. "Are you sure?" he asked, staring at the pregnancy test. 3 tests, I'm sure. He was quiet for so long I thought he might faint. Then he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Marry me." "What? I love you so much, Lucy. I want this. You, our baby, all of it, marry me." He got down on one knee right there in our living room, pulling out a ring that must have cost more than I made in a year. "Lucy Martinez, will you marry me?" Through my tears, I said yes. That night, Oscar finally told me the truth about who he really was. "You know my last name is Wellington," he said quietly, as in Wellington Industries. My heart stopped. Everyone knew Wellington Industries. They owned half the city's commercial real estate and had their hands in everything from shipping to tech. "You're rich?" I asked, still processing. "My family is wealthy. I'm just me." Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what my family has, and because my mother has very specific ideas about who I should be with. What kind of ideas? The kind that don't include waitresses from foster care. I should have run then, but I was pregnant, in love, and naive enough to believe love could conquer anything. The months that followed were strange. Oscar became distant, distracted. He'd get tense phone calls and disappear for hours. When I asked about meeting his mother, he kept making excuses. When I was 7 months pregnant, Oscar ran out of excuses. His mother had apparently issued an ultimatum: bring the girl to dinner or lose your inheritance. She knows about the baby? I asked, smoothing my only decent maternity dress. She knows everything, Oscar said grimly. Lucy, you need to prepare yourself. My mother isn't like other people. She's going to test you. The Wellington estate was a mansion that belonged in a movie. Rolling lawns, marble columns, windows that sparkled like diamonds. I felt like I was visiting royalty. Victoria Wellington was everything I'd feared. Perfectly polished, ice cold, and clearly viewing me as something distasteful she needed to deal with. So you're the waitress, she said by way of greeting. Not hello or nice to meet you, just a statement of fact that felt like an insult. I prefer Lucy, I replied, trying to sound confident despite my racing heart. Dinner was an interrogation disguised as polite conversation. Where was I from? What was my family background? What were my goals? Each question was designed to highlight exactly how unsuitable I was for her precious son. And the pregnancy, she said over dessert like she was discussing the weather. How fortunate for you. I'm excited to be a mother, I said carefully. I'm sure you are. Nothing quite like a baby to secure your future, is there? My cheeks burned. Mrs. Wellington, I would never. Wouldn't you? Tell me, dear, what exactly do you bring to this relationship besides your condition? Mother, Oscar said weakly, but he didn't defend me. You have no family, no money, no education, no prospects. You work in a diner. What could you possibly offer my son except to drag him down to your level? I love him, I whispered. She actually laughed. Love. How quaint. If you truly loved Oscar, you'd want what's best for him. And what's best for him isn't being trapped by an unwed mother from the wrong side of town. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried until my eyes were swollen. When I returned, Oscar was having a heated, whispered conversation with his mother. They stopped when they saw me. The ride home was silent until I couldn't take it anymore. Are you going to say anything about what just happened? She's protective, Oscar said weakly. She'll come around. She accused me of trapping you. She didn't mean it like that. Then why didn't you defend me? He pulled into our parking garage and turned off the engine, because fighting with her makes everything harder. And I make everything harder too, don't I? His silence was my answer. I went into labor on a Tuesday morning. After 18 hours of difficult labor, the doctors decided I needed an emergency C-section. The baby was in distress, and so was I. I'll be right here when you wake up, Oscar promised as they wheeled me into surgery. Our son was born at 2:47 a.m. Daniel Oscar Martinez Wellington. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, dark hair like mine, and the most beautiful eyes I'd ever seen. When they placed him on my chest, I felt a love so fierce it took my breath away. He's beautiful, I whispered to Oscar, who was standing by the window looking uncomfortable. Oscar, don't you want to hold your son? He turned, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. Guilt, fear, regret. Lucy, we need to talk. Now? I just gave birth. Can it wait? No, it can't. He sat down but wouldn't look at Daniel. My mother came to see me while you were in labor. My heart started racing. What did she say? She made things very clear. If I stay with you, I lose everything. My job, my inheritance, my family. She'll make sure I never work anywhere in this city again. I stared at him in disbelief. And? I'm 25, Lucy. I've never worked anywhere but the family company. I don't know how to do anything else. If I choose you, I'll have nothing to offer you or the baby. You'd have us. You'd have your son. Would that be enough when we're living in some tiny apartment, struggling to pay bills, when you're exhausted from working multiple jobs just to survive? I looked down at Daniel, sleeping peacefully. I can't believe you're saying this. I'm trying to be realistic. You're being a coward. He flinched. I'm trying to do what's best for everyone. No, you're doing what's easiest for you. Oscar stood up, his face pale. I've already decided. I'm going back to work tomorrow. I think it's better if I move out when you get home from the hospital. So that's it? You're just abandoning us? I'm setting you free to find someone who can give you what you deserve. What I deserve is the man who promised to love me forever. What I deserve is a father for my son. I'm sorry, Lucy. I really am. He left without holding Daniel, without kissing me goodbye, without looking back. I held my newborn son and cried until the nurses came to check on us. The next few days were a blur of pain, exhaustion, and terror. I had no family, no money saved up, and no idea how I was going to survive as a single mother. When I was discharged from the hospital, I came home to an empty apartment. Oscar had taken all his things and left me with nothing but furniture that belonged to the landlord and hospital bills I couldn't pay. The rent was due in 2 weeks, and I had exactly $347 in my checking account. I called the diner, hoping my boss would let me come back to work, but she'd already hired someone to replace me. I'm sorry, honey, she said. I can't hold a job for someone who doesn't know when they're coming back. You understand. I understood, but it didn't make it hurt less. Finding childcare was impossible without money. Finding work was impossible without childcare. I was trapped in a cycle that seemed designed to keep me down. Mrs. Chen, my elderly neighbor, knocked on my door one evening when Daniel was crying, and I was at the end of my rope. You need help, she said simply. I watch baby during day. You find work. Pay me when you can. I cried from relief. Mrs. Chen became my guardian angel, watching Daniel while I pounded the pavement looking for any job that would hire a new mother. Finally, I found work at a call center that offered evening shifts. The pay was terrible, barely minimum wage, but it meant I could be with Daniel during the day and work while he slept. Those first months were the hardest of my life. I was exhausted, broke, and completely alone. I lived on peanut butter sandwiches and whatever cheap groceries I could afford. I hadn't bought new clothes in so long that my pre-pregnancy jeans hung loose on my post-baby body. The worst part wasn't the poverty, it was the loneliness. Seeing other families at the grocery store, watching couples at the park with their children, wondering what I'd done wrong to deserve this. Sometimes I'd drive past Oscar's apartment building, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, wanting to show him what he was missing. But I never saw him, and eventually I stopped looking. When Daniel was 6 months old, I was working at the call center and hating every minute of it. The customer service software we used was terrible, slow, confusing, and it made every call take twice as long as it should have. During my breaks, I'd sketch out ideas for how to make it better. I'd always been good with computers in school, and I started teaching myself programming using free tutorials online at the library. What are you working on? Asked Marcus, one of my coworkers who'd noticed me coding during lunch breaks. Just an idea for better customer service software, I said, embarrassed. It's probably stupid. Can I see? I showed him my rough prototype, and his eyes lit up. This is brilliant. Have you thought about actually building this? That conversation changed everything. Marcus introduced me to his friend Sarah, a marketing expert who'd been laid off from a big agency. The three of us started meeting at my tiny kitchen table after Daniel went to bed, planning what would become ConnectFlow Solutions. We had no money, no connections, and no experience running a business. But we had hunger, determination, and a solution to a real problem. For the next year, I lived a double life. During the day, I was a single mom taking care of Daniel. In the evening, I worked at the call center. And late at night, after Daniel was asleep, I coded until 2 a.m. My fingers were practically raw from typing, my eyes burned from staring at screens, and I survived on coffee and pure determination. But slowly, our platform started taking shape. Our first client was a small restaurant that paid us $200 a month to use our software. I'll never forget that first payment. It was more money than I'd ever made from something I'd created. We actually did it, I told Marcus and Sarah. Someone is paying us for something we built. Our second client was a plumbing company, then a small law firm. Word started spreading about our affordable, easy-to-use customer service platform. When Daniel turned 2, I was able to quit the call center. ConnectFlow was making enough money to pay my rent, buy groceries, and even start a small college fund for Daniel. By his 3rd birthday, we had 50 clients and had hired our first employee. By his 4th birthday, we had 300 clients and a team of 12 people. The growth was incredible. Small businesses loved us because we solved real problems at prices they could afford. We got written up in trade magazines, won industry awards, and attracted serious investors. I'll never forget the day we got our first $1 million valuation. I was in my tiny apartment, the same one where I'd cried myself to sleep so many nights, and suddenly I was technically a millionaire. But the real victory wasn't the money, it was the respect. Other entrepreneurs asked for my advice. I was invited to speak at conferences. Industry leaders wanted to partner with us. I was no longer the abandoned single mother from the diner. I was Lucy Martinez, CEO and founder of ConnectFlow Solutions. By the time Daniel turned 5, my life was unrecognizable. ConnectFlow had grown into a company worth over millions of dollars, and I owned the majority of it. I bought us a beautiful house in a good neighborhood. Nothing as fancy as the Wellington Mansion, but a real home with a backyard where Daniel could play. I hired a nanny so I could focus on growing the business without worrying about childcare. More importantly, I'd found my confidence. I wasn't the insecure girl who'd let Victoria Wellington intimidate her. I was a businesswoman who'd built something meaningful from scratch. Daniel was thriving too. He was smart, funny, and well-adjusted despite having only one parent. He knew his father had left when he was a baby, but I'd never bad-mouthed Oscar to him. Maybe Daddy had to go away for work, Daniel said one day. Like the astronauts. Maybe, I agreed, because it was easier than explaining that his father had chosen his grandmother's approval over his own son. I started dating again, but carefully. I'd learned the hard way that not everyone who shows interest in you actually values you. I was selective, cautious, and I never introduced anyone to Daniel unless I was serious about them. My life was full, successful, and happy. I'd built everything I'd ever dreamed of, and I'd done it entirely on my own. It was a Tuesday afternoon in spring when my world shifted again. Daniel and I were at Riverside Park, and he was playing soccer with some other kids while I answered emails on my phone. A ball rolled toward a man sitting on a nearby bench. He picked it up and looked around for its owner. "Over here, mister," Daniel called, running toward him. I looked up from my phone and froze. The man handing my son his ball was Oscar. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. His expensive clothes had been replaced by a simple button-down shirt and khakis, but it was definitely him. "Thanks. I'm Daniel," my son said brightly. "I'm really good at soccer. Want to see?" "Daniel's a great name," Oscar replied, his voice shaky. "I'm Oscar." "That's my daddy's name, too. But I don't have a daddy. It's just me and Mommy." I saw Oscar's face crumple at those words. He looked up, and our eyes met across the playground. "Daniel," I called, standing up. "Come here, sweetheart." Daniel ran back to me, and Oscar slowly approached. We stared at each other for a long moment, 5 years of history hanging between us. "Lucy," he said quietly. "Oscar." Daniel looked between us curiously. "Do you know each other?" We used to, I said, never taking my eyes off Oscar. Mommy, he has the same name as my daddy. The words hit Oscar like a physical blow. His face went pale, and I saw tears in his eyes. Daniel, go play for a few more minutes, okay? Stay where I can see you. After Daniel ran off, Oscar and I sat on a nearby bench with careful distance between us. He's beautiful, Oscar said, watching our son play. He's everything to me, I replied. He said he doesn't have a daddy. He doesn't. He has a biological father who abandoned him, but he doesn't have a daddy. Oscar winced at the deliberate distinction. Lucy, I need you to know. Don't, I interrupted. Whatever you're about to say, don't. We don't need your explanations or your guilt. I made a terrible mistake. You made a choice. You chose your mother's money over your own son. I was scared and stupid, and you were 25 years old. You were old enough to know better. I studied his face. He looked defeated, broken in a way that might have made me feel sorry for him once. But I was no longer the desperate girl who'd begged him not to leave. You look successful, he said, probably noticing my designer suit and expensive handbag. I am successful. I built a company, Oscar. I'm the CEO of ConnectFlow Solutions. His eyes widened in recognition. You're the ConnectFlow CEO? I know that company. You're worth millions. I am. I built it from nothing, with a baby on my hip and determination in my heart. We sat in silence, watching Daniel laugh with the other children. I think about you both every day, Oscar said finally. That must be exhausting, I replied without sympathy. Lucy, I know I have no right to ask, but is there any chance? Any chance of what? Of being part of his life? Of trying to make this right? I turned to face him fully, and for the first time since this conversation started, I smiled. Not warmly, but with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was worth. Oscar, let me tell you something. 5 years ago, you had a choice between love and comfort, between family and money, between courage and cowardice. You chose comfort, money, and cowardice. His face crumpled. Daniel doesn't need a father who might abandon him again when things get difficult. He needs consistency, reliability, and unconditional love. He gets all of that from me. I've changed. Have you? Because from what I can see, you're still the same person who runs when his mother disapproves. The same person who values other people's opinions more than his own family. I stood up, gathering my purse. But thank you for leaving us, Oscar. Thank you for showing me that I didn't need you to be complete. Thank you for forcing me to discover my own strength. Daniel came running back to us, breathing hard from playing. Ready to go, baby? I asked. Can we get ice cream? Of course we can. As we walked away, I heard Oscar call out, Lucy, wait. I turned back. I'm proud of you, he said, for what you've built, for who you've become. I'm proud of both of you. Your pride doesn't matter to us anymore, I said simply. We're proud of ourselves. Later, I found out through mutual acquaintances what happened to Oscar after our encounter. He went home, drove to the Wellington mansion for the first time in months. Oscar, darling, his mother said, surprised to see him. What brings you by? I saw them yesterday, Lucy and Daniel. Victoria's expression hardened. I see. Did you know about her success? About what she's built? I make it my business to stay informed about potential threats. Threats? She's built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. She's not a threat. She's remarkable. She's still the gold-digging waitress who trapped my son. She never trapped me. Oscar exploded. I loved her and she loved me, and we made a beautiful child together. The only person who trapped anyone was you. You trapped me in a life of cowardice and regret. Oscar, you're being emotional. I'm being honest for the first time in years. You convinced me that love wasn't enough, that I'd be failing them by choosing them. But you know what? They didn't fail. They thrived. The only person who failed was me. He paced to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured grounds. I've spent 5 years telling myself I made a noble sacrifice, but there was nothing noble about it. I was just too weak to fight for my own family. That family was beneath you. No, Mother, I was beneath them. Lucy built something incredible while I've been living off your money and your approval. Daniel is growing up happy and loved while I've been miserable and alone. Victoria stood up, her composure finally cracking. If you're thinking of trying to insert yourself back into their lives, I'm not. They don't need me. They never needed me. That's the most painful part of all. They're perfect without me. Oscar turned to face his mother, this woman who'd controlled his life for 30 years. But I'm done living this half-life you designed for me. I'm done being your puppet. If you leave this family, you'll have nothing. Maybe, but I'll finally have a chance to build something real, something I can be proud of. He walked toward the door, then stopped. You know what's really tragic, Mother? You could have had a grandson who thinks you hung the moon. You could have had a daughter-in-law who built an empire from scratch. Instead, you chose fear and control. Oscar, if you walk out that door, I know, you'll cut me off. You'll disown me. You'll make sure I never work in this city again. But you know what? I'd rather be poor and honest than rich and ashamed. He left her standing in that mansion, surrounded by all her wealth and power and loneliness. I later learned that he moved into a small apartment and got a job at a consulting firm. The pay was a fraction of what he'd made at Wellington Industries, but it was honest work. He started therapy, began volunteering at a children's center, and slowly began building a life he could be proud of. He never tried to contact Daniel or me again. I am glad it seems he understood that his role in our story had ended the day he walked out of that hospital room. As for me, Daniel and I continued to thrive. ConnectFlow grew. I remarried eventually, a wonderful man named David who loved Daniel like his own son, and who proved that real love means choosing your family every single day. Daniel grew up knowing his origin story, not as a tale of abandonment, but as a story of triumph. He knew that his mother had built an empire from nothing, that we'd survived and thrived because we had each other. On his 10th birthday, Daniel asked me if I ever regretted what happened with his biological father. Never, I told him honestly. Because if he hadn't left, I never would have discovered how strong I really am. I never would have built ConnectFlow. I never would have become the person I was meant to be. And I never would have met Dad David, Daniel added, referring to my husband. Exactly. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best thing that happens to you. That night, I posted a photo on social media. Daniel, David, and me at Daniel's birthday party, all smiles and laughter. The caption read, 10 years ago, I thought my life was over. Today, I know it was just beginning. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living your best life. Blessed, stronger than ever, worth it. The post went viral, inspiring thousands of single mothers around the world. Several people commented asking what happened to Daniel's biological father. I replied simply, some people are just chapters in your story, not the whole book. The important thing is making sure your story has a happy ending, and it did. We did. Thank you for listening to my story. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Have you experienced something like this? Share your story. We want to hear from you too.